Hello, everyone. I'm Mohammed Altaf. I'm the chair of the branch. This is our second webinar in the series of AI webinars given by Professor Ashley Braganza and Dr. Weifeng Cheng. We had an extremely interesting event last time, and I'm sure this is going to be as exciting or even better. We have two short surveys, very interesting ones today, and it's conducted for solely research purposes. And Ashley and his team will share these results once it is completed. So please take part in them. As I said, they're very interesting, and I'm sure the results when it comes out will be even more interesting to see. Please post your questions, and we will take this up during the Q&A session. I'm now going to hand you on to Ashley and Weifeng, who are going to start the talk. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Altaf and Ram. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you and welcome to our session this afternoon. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy diaries to come and listen and share some ideas on AI and business models. Just before we move on to the agenda and the substantive matters, I thought if you are here for the first time, we might Weifeng and I do a brief round of introductions, and then we move on. I'll kick off. So I'm Ashley Braganza. I'm a professor in Brunel Business School. My area is organizational transformation. I'm also deputy dean of one of the colleges that makes up a vast chunk of the university. And for this afternoon's purpose, let me tell you about a different hat or a different role that I have, which is I founded the Center for AI. And this was a couple of years ago, in fact, slightly more. It's coming on to 3 years ago, 2018. And what Weifeng and I did at that time was we said what we wanted to do was take a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach to understanding AI in its entirety. And we wanted to understand AI at 3 levels: at a societal level, at an organizational or an industry level, and at an individual or a household level. And to do that, we clearly, it couldn't have been just the two of us. So since then, the center has about 25 members from all parts of Brunel, from virtually every discipline that you can think of: engineering, health, computer science, arts, marketing, law. I mean, we have a very wide range of disciplines, and that's just in Brunel. And then we've got universities and companies that we work with further afield. Altaf mentioned doing a survey, and this is part of an ongoing research program that we have as part of the center. One of the things we want to do is we are very keen to co-create knowledge. So rather than us as academics sitting in some ivory tower thinking great thoughts, pontificating on substantive matters where these thoughts and writings go nowhere, we want to work with industry. We want to work with you as practitioners to co-create some knowledge that is meaningful to you, and that is something that you can do something with. So today's survey, we're going to look at AI readiness. If you were with us at the last session and you completed the survey already, you don't need to do it again. But if you haven't completed it, we'd be very interested in asking you to do so. And just a minute, which on that, and that is, there are a number of studies that rank where countries are in terms of AI and their preparedness, and the UK ranks very highly. And what we want to do is really come down and understand at the organizational level how ready organizations are. And so if you wouldn't mind completing the brief questionnaire, and we are more than happy, as Altaf said, to share our findings with you as once we've kind of got enough of a set of data. Let me hand over to Weifeng to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Weifeng Chen. I'm a senior lecturer in Brunel Business School. My research is in the innovation and technology adoption and then related area. And I'm also part of the AI Research Center. Yeah, very, very honored to be here today with Professor Braganza here. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. Shall we move on to the agenda, Weifeng? Please. So this is what we want to cover before we get to the Q&A at the end. What we want to do is talk about business models as we go through. So we thought we needed to kind of understand where most organizations are now. I want to talk a little bit about platform and business models, and then look at what this means in terms of some of the challenges that incumbent organizations have in this as we kind of move further into this AI space, and then finally to talk about some of the implications of our work, of our research, and some of the insights that we have gained with from the work that we've done, to share some of those insights with you. But we're going to start with, or I should say, Weifeng is going to start with a look at some of the traditional models, and as you would expect, coming from an academic subject, we're going to start with definitions. Weifeng.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. I'll start by looking at the business model definitions. So the concept of business model, it actually took root in the mid-1990s, and it continues to draw increasing interest among scholars and practitioners from industries like you. So today it draws even more attractions because the impact of new technology advancements such as AI. There are many definitions of business models from various perspectives. I have listed some of the most recognized definitions of the business model from academics in the past 2 decades also in this slide. So from all those definitions are from top-ranking academic journals. Because of the time limitation, I will not go through this definition one by one here today. I just give you a very brief summary here. So earlier literature defined business models as systems that unify interactions and exchanges among components and agents, such as customers and entrepreneurs. And then one of the most cited and recognized definition is from David Tees in 2010, published in long-range planning. So he defines business model as the way company creates, capture, and delivers value. It reflects a firm's strategy and showing its logic, and then the way it operates and creates value for its all stakeholders. The most recent literature I've listed here on business model, they combine the scope of thoughts together. So here I listed Karlovic 2021. It defines business model as a set of components or building blocks, including value proposition, cost revenue structure, key sources, resources, and competencies, target segments, and organization of activities, and the articulation between them. So we believe that business models are at heart stories that explain how enterprises work. A good business model answers the age-old question, who is the customer and what does the customer value? It also answers the fundamental questions every manager must ask. how do we make profits in this business? What is the underlying economic logic that explains how we can deliver value to our customers at a profit cost? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a very quick glance, if you like, of a traditional business model very briefly. So before the time of computers and spreadsheets, so more precisely, that is before 1995, before Sir Berners-Lee introduced the well-known World Wide Web, the internet, and before the business process reengineering, the e-commerce era. Traditionally, all business models are involved from manufacturers, listed here, traditionally to use and transfer materials to assembly of pre-made parts into finished goods or products. The sales can be taken care of by the parent company or outsourced. For example, the cement industry falls to this category. Distributors are those companies or people act as in between the manufacturers and retailers or customers. So, for instance, the car dealers, or the retailers. So they operate via physical or online locations to purchase products from the manufacturer or distributor and then sell them to the public or customers. So as you know, the well-known Porter's value chain model was actually famously introduced by Mike Porter, a very famous Harvard professor on business strategy management. In his book, The Competitive Advantage, in 1985, it's nearly 4 decades ago, he reflected and analyzed the traditional business models, actually. So Porter's value chain consists of all those activities an organization performs to create value to its customers, including inbound, outbound logistics, operations, marketing, sales, and services. And in the business world today, there are many traditional business models are still widely used and quite relevant today. There are many of them. Because of the time, I've just listed 4 business models here that you will hear very often. So for instance, the razor blade and reverse razor blade model, basically the razor blade model. This business model is to pair a dependent good with a consumable good. So the former is sold at a low price and the latter at a high price. So for instance, Gillette, listed here, sells its razor cheaply and the blades more expensive. So the income is actually generated from the blades. The Nintendo Wii it sells its console and game, and then the profits are mainly from the games. Xbox also follow this business model. The second one is the franchise business model. A franchise is a kind of agreement between a franchisor and a franchisee. The franchisee buys the right use to use the established name, trademark, operational strategy, and sell products under their name. The fee is paid to known as licensing fee, and apart from that, the parent company charges royalties, which is a percentage of gross sales. The franchisor take care of the overall and affiliate operation strategies, such as products and advertising. So a franchisee is a much safer operation compared to those entrepreneurs that own business. There are many examples in this model, for instance, McDonald's, Domino's, Starbucks. Apparently, those companies are doing very well during the pandemic. The third one is called direct sale business model. Companies such as Safestar UK, Amway, Herbalife use this business model. So for this kind of business model, there are no retail stores, So there's an army of salespeople, salesmen connected with this with the company, act as links between the company and the retailer or customer. The product demonstration takes place in the customer's home or any business setting, wherever the salesperson chooses, really. And the salesperson will take a cut from the sales made, and the parent company retains the rest of it. So, for instance, I think you might be familiar. One of the top supplier of double glazing windows is called Star UK. So they will send, normally if you find a product, if you're interested in a product, you make a phone call, they will send a salesman to your house and do all the measurements and try to give you a quote, and they can offer. And this salesman will take a cut from the sales as a commission, basically. This business, I'm not sure how many of them actually survived during this pandemic at the moment. So it's quite interesting to know. The last one I'm going to talk about is the multi-brand business model. In this business model, one corporation owns many brands, none of which are marketed in relation to each other or the parent company who owns them. So I take example, let's say Unilever. It owns over 400 brands. You might have heard Dove, Lipton, or Magnum. You can see how diverse their product portfolio is. For this business model, the supply chain, marketing, and branding strategy, or other key operations, they are very centralized. While product research and development and other product-specific operations are decentralized to ensure they are innovative, they're creative, and responsive to the market demands. The independent nature of this model allows this company, this corporation, to enter any market from either lower-end economical or the high-end luxury, so without affecting its existing product range or sales. As you might know, Unilever is number 4 largest advertiser in the world. But anyway, again, there are many examples of multi-brand business model there today. Here are listed Volkswagen, Unilever, even L'Oreal. So there's so many examples. Okay, I think I finished this very quick overview of traditional business models. I'm handing over to Ashley. Over to you, Ashley.
Thanks, Weifeng. What we thought we might do at this point is ask you to have a quick look at the survey and have a first pass at answering some of the questions in the survey. Altaf, if you're there, which I'm hoping you are, will you put this link in the chat?
I am, and I've just posted that link in the chat.
I'm hoping everyone.
You might have to use it on your browser.
It shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes to complete. Honestly, it's a very simple, very simple survey. It does not ask for any personal information. It asks a little bit about your organization just to get some organizational demographic data, the size of your company, the age of your company, that kind of thing. And then it just asks for your views against a set of statements on a 5-point scale. So literally, it's a few clicks and you're through. We'll give people a few minutes just to answer. If anyone's having any difficulty in accessing the link or the survey, if you wouldn't mind putting that into the chat, then Altaf could let us know and we can see if there's something we can do to
either the chat facility or even the question. Yeah, so there's some response where they've completed the survey.
Okay, perfect. Because Weifeng and I can't see any of the kind of any of that at the moment, so that would be
I think while giving them a couple of minutes, Ashley, what are you hoping to get out of this research here, Ashley, on this question?
So what we're sure. So what we're looking to do is to get a snapshot of how ready organizations are in terms of coming to to this whole field of AI. We did a pilot survey, and there are some very interesting findings in terms of what people are already saying in terms of their organization's readiness for AI. And by and large, if I could summarize it in one or two sentences, without getting into the detail, it would appear that organizations are not very ready for AI, which I think is interesting. But as things currently stand, our data set is too small to say anything kind of firm. But it does. So that's what we're looking to do, is just get an idea about how ready are UK businesses, or businesses, I shouldn't just say UK businesses, in terms of AI.
Okay, thank you. I guess that, yeah, a few more have said they have completed. Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Should we move on? And by all means, do feel free to click on that link and answer the questions if you've not already done so. So what I want to do now is really move on to platform businesses, and as you can imagine, this whole notion of platform business models really didn't exist in any meaningful way, at least in the literature, until a few years ago. And now you can't get away from reading articles on platform business models. But what we wanted to do was kind of give you our take on this and some insights that we've got from the work of the Center for AI and the research that we've done. Weifeng, if I could ask you to move to the next slide, please. So this is from some work that we did looking at organizations, and what came out for us was this notion that there are two types, and if I were to categorize them, two categories, if you like, of platform business models. And what I'd like to do is just kind of give you a little thumbnail sketch of what these two types of business models are. So micro business models are those that exist in incumbent organizations. They exist in incumbent organizations very often in different departments or in different parts of the organization. They have tended to kind of grow with the organization over time. So they depending on the culture, the context, depending on the strategy of the organization and what it's done over time, these micro platforms have kind of evolved and changed to keep up with the organization. They've tended to be quite narrow in focus. So you could have, very, very narrow platforms, or you could have platforms that perhaps stretch across entire processes or multiple departments. They are run on algorithms. The data they use tends to be very local and very specific to the organization. If you tend to look at the stakeholders, they tend to be mainly internal to the organization. So these platforms tend to serve people within the organization. They don't always necessarily serve people outside the organization. They very often are independent. So if you've worked in organizations where you've heard words like data islands, data silos, system silos, very often they tend to work within functions or perhaps covering a small number of functions. Very often these are workflow systems, so the focus tends to be around looking at how work is moving around, or looking at how an approval is moving around a particular workflow, managing it, controlling it, making sure things are getting done on time. So by and large, we're calling those sorts of platforms micro platforms. We distinguish those from macro platforms, and macro platforms are really very often organizations that kind of created with the internet in mind. They were created with almost AI in mind. They tend to be very data-driven digital business platforms. They cover a range of activities, and very often the algorithms are run by big data. They're run by data that is not just within the organization, but data that they bring from outside the organization in order to make sense of what's going on, or in order to make sense of the offer that is about to be put forward. They involve significant amounts of computing power, and they generally, where they exist, they tend to be highly disruptive, and they've been tended to focus around things like the sharing economy, or the gig economy, or the on-demand economy. So very often these are associated with those sorts of activities. They can be two-sided or multi-sided ecosystems, very often bringing together a variety of stakeholders, very often outside the organization, whether it's consumers and suppliers, distributors, manufacturers. So the sort of traditional value chain that Weifeng was talking about, platforms will bring those together in some kind of combination, in some sort of way. And very often the platform is kind of at the center of the ecosystem, and then these other stakeholders tend to kind of revolve or go around them. I've provided you with some examples here, but those are only some. I'm sure you can think of many others. And the other thing I wanted to also kind of bring to bear is very often these macro platforms are being kind of started up and are getting going, almost on a daily basis. People are now starting to move away from traditional business models and are starting to move towards these platform business models. And the term gigification is a word that we coined to suggest that increasingly work is moving away from kind of being full-time employees to becoming much more gig-like, so that even where work is being done, you don't necessarily always have to have a full-time employee in the organization. Because of the way the platforms operate and because of the way work is constructed, increasingly that work can be done by people doing jobs that are very gig-like, and that is that's not just, dare I say, repetitive, mundane, or physical tasks. These could be tasks or jobs that are done by quite senior people, very responsible positions quite high up the vertical hierarchy. Okay, so these platforms are evolving and changing the way in which work itself is happening. Weifeng, if I could ask you to move to the next slide. So what I wanted to do in this bit of the presentation is I'd like to get you to focus on kind of incumbent organizations. God knows that these platform businesses, particularly the macro platform businesses, the Ubers, the Amazons, and the like, they get an awful lot of airtime. Okay, everybody's talking about them, everybody's studying them, everybody's telling you to be like them. Okay, our concern in terms of business models is the whole set of organizations that exist in a particular industry or sector today. These incumbent organizations, and it seems to us that these incumbent organizations are really being left behind and are almost being forgotten. And in many ways, I'd like to use today as a way of kind of rebalancing that focus and starting to say, so how do incumbent organizations kind of deal with who have these these micro platforms perhaps? How do they move towards becoming a macro platform, given they weren't created as macro platforms? And so kind of where I wanted to get started with this is to get you to think about one of these existing incumbent organizations, okay? And what you will begin to see is they have a business model. They're not starting with a blank sheet of paper. It's not a greenfield site. It's a brownfield site. And this business model, which has been around in some cases for a few years, in other cases for hundreds of years, or certainly many decades, right? That business model was created on this value chain logic that has served its purpose and done quite well. And this value chain logic, in some ways, is the nub of the logic that these platform businesses are completely undermining. Okay, so if you're in one of these traditional incumbent business models, organizations, I'm almost sure you will recognize that the underpinning logic of the model itself is starting to change. Incumbent organizations have strategies. These and again, these strategies have been designed. They've been refined over years. People have designed these strategies based on certain products or markets, or they've adopted a certain market position in terms of how they are seen as a brand or how they are seen as an organization and how they work. And these strategies have been taught through by people at the senior-most levels, and they've been committed to at the senior-most levels. And so there is a level of drive to make these strategies work. More often than not, these organizations have a whole set of tangible assets. You open their balance sheet and you will see in the balance sheet will be listed all the various tangible assets that they have. And those very often kind of lock an organization into what it does and how it does certain things. Whether it's building soil, you know the set of tangible assets I'm talking about. And these tangible assets have served and continue to serve the business in a very important way, but they are there, right? The organization may have business processes that they've invested significant amounts of money in over the years to automate, or and very often to put those pieces of platform technologies in to support the business processes or to make those business processes more integrated. So whether it's the lead to cash process or the concept of showroom, there are umpteen processes that make up organizations, and they are there and they are operating. The organization may have a whole set of intangible assets around the brand, around its capabilities. We can do something no one else in our industry can do. We have a unique strategic capability that allows us to bring customers to us. Okay, there are products and services. Very often, these products and services are the ones that are generating revenue today, and we are committed to these products and services because they are what define who we are and what we do. Okay, and the last bit is around employees, and I shouldn't say the last bit. Core to all incumbent organizations are employees, and we have them in all sorts of guises, and they're in all sorts of contractual agreements, whether they're full-time employees or part-time contractors, zero-hour contracts. Most organizations have a whole range of employees that they have. Weifeng, if I could ask you to move to the next slide. And really, this is the representation, if you like, or a different representation of these micro platforms. I.e., there are lots of these platforms around, and the constellation of platforms makes up the organization. And if I could ask you to hit the button again, please, Weifeng. And this is, I think, the big challenge here. The challenge, I think, for a number of organizations is how do you transform? How do you actually go through the changes that you have to go through in order to, Weifeng, if I could ask you to go again. Thank you. In order to become one of these macro platforms. And I think a number of organizations are struggling, incumbent organizations are really struggling to think about how you make this transition. How do you actually get from being over on the left to being over on the right? Because you're talking about fundamentally reshaping the business model, irrespective of what type of business model you have. And part of what we want to kind of get you to think about in today's session is how you make this journey, how you begin to make this transformation. Weifeng, if I could ask you to go again. Thank you. So when we're talking about platform businesses, and again, these platform businesses, a bit as Weifeng was indicating, that if you look at traditional business models, they too come in lots of varieties. I think he took you through kind of 4 of them. You know, there are lots of different varieties of macro business platform businesses, and I give you here just again a handful to illustrate the sorts of platform businesses that are out there. And part of what I think organizations, incumbent organizations, need to start to think about is kind of which type of platform do we want to be as we go through this transformation. And therein lies, I think, a big challenge for many organizations, because a lot of the organizations have some of these activities wrapped up all together, or actually don't have these as an offering. And maybe part of what they need to do is some parts of the business may need to go down these different types of platforms in order to thrive. And it's a strategically a very difficult discussion to be had at the board. And part of what we want to do is start to get that kind of conversation, get that discussion going, starting in this today through this presentation. Weifeng, if I could ask you to go again. So this survey, it comes in 2 parts. So the part 2 of the survey, if I could ask you to again, Altaf will put the link in the chat. If we could ask you to have a quick go at this survey again, it's very quick to answer, but if you wouldn't mind doing that, because part of what we want to do is understand, you know, dare I say, organizational readiness in terms of making this transition, which is how the two, the survey links up with the presentation that we have here today. So if I could ask you to take again a couple of minutes, because it's the same sort of format as before. I should add that the two parts of the survey are connected, i.e. they do form one integrated survey. So if you haven't completed part one, but have completed part two now, if I could ask you to go back and complete part one, that would be very helpful, please. Otherwise, it would be we wouldn't be able to include just one part of the survey.
Just giving a couple of minutes more for it.
Lovely, thank you.
So actually, on just a very quick one, then, what type of time frame are you looking at in terms of trying to get some information on this survey and this research that you are doing to understand the readiness as such?
Yes, what we're hoping to do is to try to get, so in some ways we are dependent on having sufficient data to be able to, for it to be kind of make sense from a statistical point of view. So in one sense, that forms part of a constraint. But what we are hoping to do is by late spring, early summer, so by May or June, we're hoping to have the survey completed, and then we will be able to send the results out to people who have indicated they would like to have a copy of our results.
Okay, thank you.
That's broadly speaking the timescale we're talking about. Until then, it's not like we're not analyzing data as it comes in, but I've got to preface everything with it's still the sample is not big enough to be statistically robust, which is why I tend to be very tentative in anything I say for the time being.
I think we can continue now.
Yep, absolutely. Good, thank you. So what we wanted to do is really start to get you to think about, in our words, what are some of the challenges that we think organizations are going to face in going through this transformation. And in doing that, we thought it would be useful, and I mean, clearly we've named names, and these are more for indicative purposes rather than talking about a particular organization. So more to illustrate the kind of points that we're making. So what we wanted to do is really talk about, let me tell you about the two axes here. The first, the vertical axis is really looking at the core of any platform business is data and technology integration. And the reason we say this is if you look at all of these platform businesses, their ability to become data-driven business models, so data-driven platforms, is just incredible. So whether it's Amazon's recommendation ability, whether it's being able to say we've got, if you look at Uber, if you look at Airbnb, you look at any of these macro platforms, and what is absolutely striking is their ability at the core, is their ability to manage large amounts of data, and for that technology to be seamless, both from an external point of view, so if you're the user of that service, but also then throughout the entire ecosystem. The technology brings the whole ecosystem together, and data is shared, or the relevant data, not all data, because data has value, as you're very clearly aware. All relevant data is shared to make that work. And so on this scale, on the left-hand vertical axis, we've got a kind of low to high rating. And what we wanted to kind of indicate is along the x-axis is time. And so what you begin to see is that there are very clearly organizations that are organized and their business model is premised on this value chain logic. And I give you one, but the retail sector, I think, is particularly, dare I say it, it's particularly in sharp focus because of all the news recently of just how the retail sector has suffered, not just because of the pandemic, which has brought its own challenges, but clearly the view has always been in the retail sector that with the introduction of all these platform businesses, the retail sector was going to have to change. It's just, the pandemic has shrunk the time hugely in terms of where they had to make the changes to keep up. If you start to look at network business models, if you start to see how organizations have already started to work as networks of suppliers and retailers and distributors and bringing them all together, I think Toyota is an excellent example of a networked organization, all the way down their supply chain, down to tier 5, tier 6 suppliers, all the way up through the supply chain. It's not even a supply chain, it's more a supply network that Toyota operates, and they sit at the center of it and manage it incredibly well. And you can begin to see other organizations have adopted that, and they've kind of worked on that basis. But clearly you need to think about the business model for Toyota and the business model for, let's say, Tesla, which is a very different business model in terms of how they operate. And where we think organizations are heading and are starting to get to now is kind of looking at the ecosystem, and organizations I think have already started on that journey, and some of them are there. And then you've got platform businesses, which is the one that we're talking about today. And part of what we wanted to show you visually here is just the incredible gap between the logic of having a business model that's based around the value chain and the logic of an organization that is a platform business. We think that transformation is a significant change in what has to happen in the organization. And this was in part to show it visually, kind of just the amount of change that has to happen, but also to start to say you can begin to see where organizations are unable to make that transformation. You can see in the retail sector, some organizations have already started to some have gone bust. Others are starting to really feel the pain of not perhaps either making that transformation or not making that transformation fast enough in terms of where organizations are. And so for us, this model here, this way of kind of getting you to think about how are incumbent organizations going to deal with AI is kind of what we're trying to get across. Weifeng, if I could ask you to go to the next slide, please. Nope. Yes, here. So what does this all mean? What does this all mean? I think if we were to boil it down, I think this comes to a whole range of things, but what we've tried to do is just to kind of get you to focus on a few things here. I think this transformation is going to fundamentally shift, and I'm talking about incumbent organizations now. I'm talking about incumbent organization companies that are already existing in an industry. I think this is going to lead to, and this is going to require a massive power shift within the organization. I'm not sure, and this is part of what we're looking to do with this AI readiness survey. I'm not sure the extent to which boards and managers at the senior most levels really understand, really get the story about how these technologies are going to really impact their business. And I think there are many who are still thinking that maybe it will bypass us and it'll kind of it'll go by and we'll continue on. And in part, this is about having that struggle internally, and I think this is then also about leadership, and this is about having someone who's kind of got the courage to say the business model we have today isn't working. The logic that underpins our business model isn't working, and we need to fundamentally make that change. But it's going to be difficult because you're asking turkeys in some cases to vote for Christmas and Thanksgiving, and they, I'm a professor of organizational transformation. I can assure you turkeys, if I can continue the metaphor, in organizations tend not to vote for Christmas. Okay, but I think there is a massive leadership issue here about whether the people who take decisions about budgets, about strategy, about people, about structures, whether they're really willing to grasp the nettle. It's going to affect investment and where the investment goes. It's going to mean de-investment or disinvestment in certain things that people are very committed to. I think it's really interesting that companies like John Lewis and Marks and Spencer's have made the very symbolic move of saying our flagship store on Oxford Street is never going to be, it's not for the foreseeable future, going to be what you think it was, and potentially is never going to be back to where it was. I mean, symbolically inside the organization, I think that must send, ought to send messages through to say, the world has changed. It's a seismic change. So this whole notion of investment, AI readiness, I've already talked about. And for us, the last bit is about looking at our organizations actually working to put together an AI strategy. And in fact, we've launched, here's a little plug, okay, so forgive me. We've launched a master's program in AI strategy because we think organizations really are not getting to grips with putting a strategy together and thinking about how are we going to actually manage our way through this. Because if we don't manage our way, if we don't transform our way through this, we may not be around. So for me, it's really keen that organizations create a strategy. Weifeng, next slide, please. So we have a few minutes. Altaf, if there are any questions or if people want to fire any questions, please do so. Weifeng and I would be happy to address them.
Thank you. That was very interesting. Yes, I've got a very interesting question, and I'm going to read it out as it is because it's very interesting by one Tracy. I would love to see any research or insight you have into how AI can change the education sector. How can AI?
you know that comment about turkeys not voting to vote for Christmas. Yeah, at this point I become very turkey-like. No, I'm kidding. Sorry, go on. What was that the full question?
It says, how can AI support the education sector? Surely this sector this is a sector that is due some kind of a shake-up.
The answer is yes. I'm almost sure that AI will penetrate or I should say the use of these technologies will penetrate the education sector. You're starting to see little signs of this, but it is a matter of time. It's a matter of when. I don't think it's a matter of if anymore. The form it will take, I don't think has been settled yet. But will it affect the education sector? The answer is undoubtedly yes, would be my view. I'm not sure, Weifeng, if you want to add anything or we move on to another question.
Yeah, the next one. You mentioned about micro and macro. What should employees be doing here to probably transition? And is this an opportunity or can it be a threat?
To employees
Yes.
is the last part. I'm assuming the opportunity or threat is also in the context of employees. So from other work that we've done, and in fact we presented at the last session some of our work on the gigification of work. If you're interested to read about that, we have published a paper on it as well. So our view is that work is going to become increasingly gig-like in all sectors and all levels. Most jobs will potentially end up being gig-like as this technology starts to roll through. If I understand, the first part of the question is, what should employees be doing? I think as employees in organizations, developing your skill set, being multi-skilled, having a range of skills and competencies, I think is going to become hugely advantageous as we enter this this phase of business models. I think the other area is looking at how, as employees, we can influence the direction of travel within our organizations. And before I hand over to Weifeng, the last thing I would say is it an opportunity or threat? I'd say both, potentially. Weifeng, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, okay, yeah. I think the change, this question is actually reflect to the session we done last time, is that the AI technology has triggered the automation, which has it's one of the driver enabled this transformation to macro platform, and on the consequence is that there's a lot of jobs going to be lost, but there will be new kind of jobs will be created, require different kind of skill sets, as Ashley just mentioned earlier. So from the employee perspective and also from the employer's perspective, that they can form new kind of skills. So there'll be training. You need to get more training and then skill sets ready for this transformation for the future macro platform we're talking about. Yeah, this is one of the things I would say. Yeah. Thank you.
Nice question. Thank you. Is there any data on what percentage of micro organizations stay as micro organization?
I think it's too early to say on that. I think because the whole notion of micro businesses that have micro platforms is something we've kind of started to think about and conceptualize. So I don't think there's and it's too early in that transition. But what I would say is organizations that are incumbent organizations that are micro platform businesses, if they don't start on that journey, and I think this is where the data will end up possibly, it will be the ones that make it across to the other side, and those that don't will either remain very small or very limited in terms of their ability to grow, or will hit the wall, would be my take. But in terms of data, I think it's too early to have a clear view with data in terms of how many will and how many won't.
Thank you. Last question, because conscious of the time.
Yes.
What is your recommended transformation roadmap for the employees and employers?
Sorry, I missed the first part of that question.
Yeah. What is your recommended transformation roadmap for the employees and employers?
So I'm also Weifeng, if you want to hit the button once more. So I apologize if I gave you a plug earlier and I said it was the only one. There's one more plug, and that is we're going to be running another session on culture, leadership, and management of AI. This is the third session in this series with BCS. And in part, that's some of the things we're going to be covering. So for me, the roadmap is about starting to have that strategy. It's starting to put in place that AI strategy. It's starting to put in place the transformation plans that need to be executed to move in this direction. It's about revisiting the business models to understand what the underpinning logic is, to say what kind of platform business we want to be when we grow up. So for me, that route map or that roadmap for AI transformation is one that we are definitely we're also working on, I have to say, because I don't see people talking about this. If I'm to be honest, or doing a huge amount of thinking about this. We definitely have some ideas as to what ought to go in that transformation roadmap, and we've covered some of the things in today. And for me, part of that is understanding the culture, leadership, and management, because that's kind of where, if you look at most transformations, that's usually where they fail. They don't fail with the technology. They fail because there's an absence of leadership. There is abdication of management, or the culture in the organization just does not allow the change to take place, and the organization gets fixed in terms of where it is today. So for me, a lot of what we've been talking about in these sessions are the components of that roadmap. I'd just like to say one last thing. I'm hoping you enjoyed today, and I'm hoping you learned something today. Please do provide your feedback to the BCS because it really helps us in terms of what we're presenting, and so your feedback is really valuable. Please do share that. And if I could ask you, if you haven't completed the questionnaire and the 2 links that are in the chat, please take a few minutes out after the call or at some point. And if you wouldn't mind completing that, that would be really helpful to us. Both of us would very much appreciate that. So a small request. It's completely confidential. We've got ethical agreement and approval to do this survey from Brunel through the ethics committee. So, you know, we're not here to market. We're just here to kind of come up with some insights, because this is going to affect all of us, and I mean it when I say including us in the academic, in the education field as well. So thank you, and on behalf of both of us, thank you.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Weifeng. That was really great. Thank you. Yes, our next event is on the 22nd of April, so check the website out and book if not already there. Done, and hope to see you then. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.